This is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at go.wvu.edu/forward.
Welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm Randy Yohe. 5 bills on third reading passed in the House today, including 2 that fostered some debate over election laws, voting laws, and candidate filing periods. Criminal actions regarding registering to vote are key to House Bill 4017, modifying certain election laws, early voting laws, and absentee voting laws. The clause under debate, finding any person who intentionally coerces or offers payment in exchange for a person to register to vote is guilty of a misdemeanor and could be fined and or jailed. House Minority Leader Sean Hornbuckle, a Democrat from Cabell County, asked, with no specific definition of the terms coerced or payment, could a college campus voter registration table giving away bottled water and cookies, or the Secretary of State's high school teen voter registration campaign be seen as criminal acts?
This piece of legislation in front of us could potentially not only harm those high school students and the before mentioned college students, but our Secretary of State. This could criminalize our Secretary of State. And so I would urge us with the language to slow down, and we need to rethink what we're doing here because it could be problematic.
House Bill 4017 passed the House by a 90-7 vote. It will become effective January 1st, 2025 if it passes the Senate. Also on third reading, House Bill 4350 removes the ability of political parties to appoint candidates for their primary elections in positions where no one else has filed. Delegate Mike Pushkin, Democrat from Kanawha County, was among several House Democrats opposing the bill they say benefits incumbency and stifles participation in the elective process.
Yeah, this is a bill that only protects incumbency. The only people that care about this bill are sitting in this room or down the hall or in a couple county courthouses across the state. So when you're voting for this, ask yourself, who are you here to serve? Your constituents, the voters who deserve choices, or yourself? I'll be voting against this bill. It is self-serving at its worst.
However, Delegate Adam Vance, Republican from Wyoming County, asked if the scope of the bill still contained defined time limits, opportunities, and restrictions on filing for political office.
Is there not filing periods for these candidates to file?
There certainly are.
Did we not just close it every 2 years? We have chances of running. There's an election every 2 years in this state.
That is correct.
And so if I want somebody to run for something, I've got 2 years at least to go to them and talk to them and try to talk them in to running.
Absolutely.
I don't see the problem with this bill then. I've got 2 years, 4 years for a Senate seat and all that. There shouldn't be extra time to just grab somebody and say, here you are on the ballot. So I'm going to be a big yes on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House Bill 4350 passed 79-18 and also now goes to the Senate. Today, the Senate passed and sent 2 bills over to the House and introduced a separate bill that would change rules for wineries in the state. Brianna Heaney has more on that.
Senate Bill 189 authorizes the state superintendents to give his or her interpretations of school law or State Board of Education rules for things like grievance procedures. However, Senator Mike Caputo, a Democrat from Marion County, says this is unfair to another party in a grievance procedure.
It should be a very fair and equally balanced procedure. You shouldn't be able to give extra weight to one person's opinion. You know, the way I see this happening, in whatever process of the appeal you may be in, if the superintendent decides to come out and issue an opinion, that tilts the scales. It's no longer fair and impartial. The grievance procedure should never be tilted or skewed one way or the other. That's what the grievance procedure is for.
He says an unbiased third party should be making decisions in a grievance procedure. The bill was passed with 2 no votes. Senate Bill 320 progressed to second reading today. The bill would remove the current requirement for wineries to also service food when serving wine. The bill's primary sponsor, Senate Majority Leader Tom Takubo, a Republican from Kanawha County, says the bill is good for the state's business climate.
This seems to be a smart move, and less regulation, more freedom. I trust people to do the right thing on this. The idea of whether there's a cracker there isn't going to save somebody's life. I don't think it adds anything to the bill.
He says deregulation in this industry could bolster the vineyard and wine industry and aid tourism.
We've got a huge potential for wine tourism growth, not only wine, but there are other industries across West Virginia. Tourism is booming in West Virginia. I think we need to embrace it as much as we can. That's why I think less regulation, let these wineries do what they can to bring in more people to grow West Virginia. It's a good move.
However, he says this is just a small change to deregulation of alcohol and drug sales, unlike a bill that the House sent over to the Senate that legalizes making moonshine or introduced legislation on the legalization of recreational marijuana.
This is a very small tweak, not a huge change. I think it provides for freedom that's reasonable, and we don't have to worry about the safety of our communities on this.
Takubo says he is against the legalization of recreational marijuana in the state. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Brianna Heaney in Charleston.
To start the week, education committees in both chambers have focused on supporting students in difficult situations. Chris Schultz has more.
According to the most recent data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, West Virginia has the 8th highest teen birth rate in the country. During their meeting Monday, the House Education Committee discussed House Bill 5179. Also known as Jaycee's Law, the bill would require that each county board develop a written attendance policy for pregnant and parenting students and excuse all absences due to pregnancy or parenting-related conditions up to 8 weeks. The bill originated from a social worker in Cabell County who had seen the school system requiring teenage girls to go back to school 1 week after giving birth. Delegate Mike Pushkin, a Democrat from Kanawha County, moved to amend language that would require schools to refer pregnant students to pregnancy health organizations.
It requires the school to refer a girl to an unlicensed healthcare provider. A lot of them also are religious based. Maybe they're not a member of that religion. There's a lot of issues with that. Sending somebody, putting in code to go to this place that looks like a doctor's office but isn't a doctor's office.
Delegate Roland Jennings, a Republican from Preston County, said he believed the bill's referral to resources fulfilled the lawmakers' promise to support pregnant women made when the state's abortion restriction was passed in 2022.
This is giving support where the schools have to at least discuss with these young mothers places where they can go and get support for them. If we make it permissive, some schools may do it, others don't want to get involved, won't do it, and I think by making it so they have to do it, we're doing the best for these young ladies.
The amendment did pass, and the bill was recommended to the full chamber. The House committee also advanced bills regarding in-state tuition for all National Guard members and their dependents, as well as Hope Scholarship funding. In the Senate Education Committee Tuesday morning, senators heard from law enforcement about the need for students to be educated about online safety. Senate Bill 466 requires the state board to develop an education program to teach safety while accessing technology. The committee previously discussed and laid over the bill on January 18th, and both times the discussion focused on the requirement for instruction on the risk associated with sharing sexually suggestive or sexually explicit materials. Sergeant Jillian Yeager of the state's Police Crimes Against Children Unit told the committee her office of 12 investigators has received 6,000 tips of sexual cybercrimes against minors in the past 4 years, mirroring a national spike during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. She said education like the kind proposed in SB 466 would go a long way to reducing such instances.
I firmly believe that if we mandate cyber safety training in the state, that it will greatly reduce our number of cyber tips simply by educating children to help themselves not become victims to these predators online.
The committee voted to recommend the bill to the full Senate and laid over the only other bill on the agenda due to time constraints. For the Legislature Today, I'm Chris Schultz in Morgantown.
Lawmakers have introduced bills this session that they say protect single-sex spaces. Advocates with LGBTQ rights organizations, though, say the legislation follows a pattern of singling out transgender people for discrimination. Curtis Tate spoke with Eli Baumwell, Interim Executive Director of the ACLU-WV, and Isabella Cortez, Gender Policy Manager for Fairness West Virginia, about those efforts.
Eli, Isabella, welcome. Thank you for being here. I want to start by talking about what they're calling the Women's Bill of Rights. The governor came out and endorsed it yesterday. What should we know about that, Isabella?
You know, frankly, the very first thing I would say about this bill is that it's insulting. So they're touting this as the Women's Bill of Rights, and yet it doesn't actually give women any new rights, and it doesn't protect any of the rights that women already have. All it really does is restricts the rights of some women. And it's, like you said, the governor had a press conference about this yesterday with the Independent Women's Voice, who these are out-of-state lobbyists who take money from the Koch brothers, and they use this dark money to, oppose the Equal Rights Amendment, to oppose the Paycheck Fairness Act. And last year, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, they downplayed the significance of that and the severe and significant adverse effects that has on women's health and their rights across the country. So, again, saying that this is a women's Bill of Rights is just quite honestly laughable.
Well, would it be correct to say that the bill could enable discrimination against transgender women specifically?
That would be correct, yes. So what the bill, and Eli is here, and I'm sure he can get much more into the effects downstream, but what the bill does is it very rigidly micromanages the definitions of male and female, and also has these provisions for private single-sex space facilities. So yes, this bill is no easy way to say it aside from an early attempt to legislate transgender people out of existence.
Now, Eli, this is not necessarily a new push here in West Virginia or any other state for that matter. From the ACLU's perspective, what are your concerns?
Well, I want to echo what Isabella said. This really isn't a Bill of Rights in any way, and the ACLU, we are an organization that cares a lot about the Bill of Rights. So, it's really concerning to see them take that language and co-opt it in a way that restricts the rights of people, particularly trans people. It doesn't actually incur any new rights. It does fly in the face of evolving case law around ensuring that trans people have fair and equal access to spaces that that coincide with their gender identity. So it's really concerning to see them do that. It's also very concerning to see the legislature try to override science to decide what and how sex is determined and gender is determined. So these are just some of the concerns that we have as we watch this piece of legislation get introduced and some of the rhetoric around it.
Well, let's take this chance to talk about something related. There's a bill called HB 4806, which is kind of, you might call it a bathroom bill. Seems to be very similar to what other states have enacted that would restrict transgender people from using the appropriate restroom or locker room in a school. Now, I think when you testified in a House committee on this, you mentioned that there was a case that went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia, and the right of a transgender male student was actually protected to use the restroom that was appropriate for him. And I think you said that should this bill become law, it has the same sort of legal problems perhaps that policy did in Virginia. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the case was the case of Grimm versus Gloucester County Schools. It was decided in 2020. And after sort of a long, winding legal battle, the Fourth Circuit came out and very forcefully said, trans identity is real, trans identity is valid. It is important that we protect trans people, and one of the ways we do that is by giving them access to bathrooms, and very forcefully said it is unconstitutional to restrict people or even to give them just single-sex spaces or single-use spaces and say, only you are allowed to do that, but you've got to sort of segregate yourself from the rest of the population. It's separate but equal. And I know that some people have thought that they could potentially repair the deficits in this bill by adding that single-use space. But again, the Fourth Circuit looked at that and said that is not okay. And so this bill is very, very similar, and worth pointing out that the Fourth Circuit is controlling for West Virginia. So West Virginia courts are bound to follow the Fourth Circuit. It's worth pointing out that the Supreme Court was asked to review this case and made a decision not to review it, to let the Fourth Circuit decision stand. That was in 2021. I think it's also worth noting as we consider the wisdom of passing legislation like this, that this one case cost the county schools $1.3 million in attorney fees to litigate unsuccessfully. So there are a lot of problems with trying to pursue policy like this.
Isabella, what do you say to those who argue that bills like this are about protecting student privacy?
You know, that's an interesting question, and no one cares more about safety than we do at Fairness West Virginia. We care about the safety of all kids and of all students, transgender or cisgender kids. And that's why we support the ruling from the Fourth Circuit, because it's all about what makes people comfortable, right? So let's say if a parent is concerned that their child might be uncomfortable, it's important to note that that is the parent and not the child. But if students would happen to be uncomfortable with using a restroom with a trans kid, they should also be allowed to use single-stall facilities, you know? When I was in high school, when we changed in the locker room, there were some children and some students who were uncomfortable changing in front of other students. And they were provided with private facilities to do that. And that's really what the heart of this is, as Eli said. It's not about, we don't want people to be uncomfortable, but we don't think that your discomfort should infringe on the rights of others. And Fourth Circuit agreed with that, and I agree that if we pass this bill, it would just lead to frivolous lawsuits about a thing that's already been settled in this jurisdiction.
Well, in terms of safety, though, what do the statistics actually say about who's really at risk for violent assault?
That's a fantastic question. So the group of people in this discussion that is actually most at risk for violence, harassment, bullying, all sorts of targeted discrimination is transgender people themselves. It's not cisgender students or cisgender people, it's the transgender students that are more at risk for bullying and targeted harassment. So again, we don't want to infringe on the rights of kids and subject them to unnecessary bullying and harassment just because a parent might be uncomfortable, especially when we provide those accommodations to cisgender students. And let me be clear, in other states where there are more inclusive laws for trans people that, you know, make it discriminatory to not let them use the correct restrooms in like the entirety of public life, there are no increases in any sort of incidents or dangerous crime that happens in bathrooms or is related to bathrooms in any way. So while we understand that some people might be concerned about safety, that's really just not the reality. The people who are actually in danger are the transgender population.
And just to be sure, when we say cisgender, we mean?
When we say cisgender, we mean people whose assigned sex at birth or biological sex, more mundanely, lines up with their gender identity.
Okay. Well, last year, some of the audience may remember that the legislature did enact House Bill 2007, which restricted gender-affirming medical care for people under 18. And that law went into effect on January 1st. I guess what I'm looking for is maybe an update as to, you know, what the sort of impact has been so far of that law since it did take effect this month.
Absolutely, Curtis, and I do want to push back very slightly. This bill didn't restrict care for gender-affirming care for minors. It severely restricts gender-affirming care for minors. We have a handful of teenagers who are able to access this care now, And we've heard from multiple families across the state that they've had to leave. They've had to move to other states to be able to get the care that their children need to live happy and healthy lives. And that's really at the heart of this, right? The science is clear. This is evidence-based medicine. Every single mental health and medical association in the state and the country says that this care is necessary, valid, and good for children who need it. And it's really disappointing that our legislature is concerned with these kinds of things, pushing good families out of the state so that their kids can live happy and healthy lives, because they're denied that in this state.
Eli, can you speak to the legal aspects of this? Is there any litigation yet in West Virginia? What about other states?
So I'm not familiar with any litigation here in West Virginia. We have seen in several states that there has been some challenges. So far in some early rulings, some of these bans have been upheld, but again, these are all early rulings. This is still a new frontier as certain states have looked to wage a war on the trans community, unfortunately. And so we have yet to see how these are going to be ruled as they start to be appealed up to higher courts. It's certainly incredibly concerning when you've got legislators who aren't medical experts, and certainly not medical experts in this area of medicine, substituting their judgment for the judgment of the physicians, the medical associations, the parents, and most importantly, the people who are seeking this sort of treatment.
Well, let's talk about a case that actually is working its way through the courts, which is related to a bill that the legislature enacted, I believe it was in 2021, HB 3293, which basically restricts or is supposed to prevent transgender students from competing in school sports. There was a lawsuit in Harrison County, a middle school student who just wanted to run on her track team. And that's now, I think, at the Fourth Circuit, which we mentioned just a little bit ago. Could you give us an update on where that is?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The Fourth Circuit just recently heard oral arguments. We'll be waiting for a decision from them. Now, again, I don't want to speculate as to what they'll do. There were certainly some positive indications, and it's worth noting that the Fourth Circuit enjoined the law. So the law is temporarily enjoined. It can't be enforced against this young individual. And the state asked the Supreme Court to look at that, to ask for an emergency ruling, and the Supreme Court once again deferred to the judgment of the Fourth Circuit and said, we agree, let this play out, but for now, this student athlete should be able to just compete on her team.
It doesn't sound like that there's been the last word on that yet, but at least so far anyway, Isabella, she's been able to compete on her team. And well, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So at the heart of this, we staunchly oppose that law that passed in 2021. It's currently working its way through the courts because I'm not sure if people are aware, but in that case with that young girl from Harrison County, they didn't actually have a cross-country team for girls. She started it, and then we made a law to ban her from participating in it. And that's really disappointing to me and to just generally everyone who's interested in fairness, right? These kids, transgender kids, don't play sports to dominate in the sport, to win these, national titles. That's not why kids in middle school and high school compete in sports. They do it because it teaches valuable life lessons, it teaches teamwork, it teaches camaraderie. And it's really disappointing that we have to, Governor Justice would sign a law into effect that affected one kid, and that we have to spend all of this time litigating it and preventing kids from just being kids.
In the roughly minute or so that we have left, maybe could each of you take about 30 seconds and tell us what else you're watching this session, what you might be concerned about.
So this session, we've seen a number of anti-LGBTQ laws. We've counted at least 36. At least 36 that either restrict or limit LGBTQ people in some way, and that goes all the way from declaring that transgender people are inherently obscene, all the way down to putting restrictions on local fairness laws. So it's pretty apparent that this legislature is concerned and has their priorities laying with hurting the LGBTQ community, and we're watching it very carefully, and I wish I had better news.
And I'll just reiterate, we're watching, I'm sure, basically the same legislation as we go through this. What's concerning to me is that we know how the courts are ruling. We know what's right and what's just and what's fair for trans people, for people in the LGBTQ community. And yet legislators are taking taxpayer dollars and taxpayer time to come up here and deal with these issues, basically to campaign on the taxpayers' dime, because that's what they're using this for.
Well, we'll be watching all of these very closely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with us. Catch the Legislature Today Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. And remember, West Virginia Public Broadcasting covers the session daily in our radio news program, West Virginia Morning, and on our news site at wvpublic.org. We also broadcast the daily floor sessions of both the House and Senate on the West Virginia channel. I'm Randy Yohe. For everyone here at WVPB, thanks for joining us. Have a great evening.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at go.wvu.edu/forward.